host us today. I'm good. Hello, those on the other end of the camera. We are recording this today. We have so many people joining externally. But if you're speaking or if you're on the panel, don't worry too much about having to turn around and things. So, yes, I'm from Cabby. We were taking part in the mNutrition initiative, which was led by the GSMA, funded by DFID UK Aid. And with GAIN and Oxfam and British Medical Journal and ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, we led the content stream of the mNutrition initiative. So our approach to this is very much from the content side, but we have got other people here today looking more at platforms for mobile, for nutrition interventions via mobile. So I'd like to welcome Lawrence, who's actually going to welcome people properly. Before we get started in the first session. So, Lawrence, please.
Thank you, Charlotte. I can't do a better job of welcoming you than Charlotte. My name's Lawrence Howard. I'm the ED of GAIN. I don't recognise many of you in the audience, which is great. Because it means I'm actually going to learn something. So I'm learning something new. Few of you I do recognise. See you again. See you again. But it means I'm going to learn something, which is good. The GAIN and the two previous organisations I've worked with were all involved with the mNutrition. So I don't know if mNutrition is following me or I'm following mNutrition, but I'm actually an enthusiast for mobile phones and nutrition, although very much not an expert. And when you think about how phones have just transformed so many people's lives, you kind of wonder, what are we doing about it in nutrition? So I'm very simplistic very often. And so just this morning, I just Googled mobile phones and nutrition. And the first 10 things that come out of the search engine are, 8 of them are things that involve IDS. Yeah. Which is quite extraordinary, actually. Because we started this at IDS about 5-6 years ago, and it's still quite modest, right, the program. So there actually isn't that much stuff on mobile phones and nutrition, sort of in the at least on the web. But I'm sure there is a lot more that's in practice, that's happening in practice, and it's just not being documented and written up about. And it's surprising it's not being documented and written up about, because the potential for mobile phones to help us advance nutrition status is huge, right? There's diagnostic stuff. You could go just at a meeting in Canada with Dominic. I don't know where's Dominic. We were hearing about using mobile phones to help diagnose blood samples and urine samples to get at macronutrients in blood, or to address macronutrient malnutrition. Actually, this was about aflatoxins, food safety issues. There's diagnostics, there's compliance issues about reminding people to do things that are good for their nutrition. There's stuff about early warning. We've seen that. There's stuff about behavior change, which is what mNutrition is trying to do. There's all sorts of potential opportunities, and yet a lot of the efforts seem to have not made a big impact. Maybe by the end of the day I'll realize they have, and I just have not been at the races. But it seems to me, from a casual observation, they haven't quite punctured consciousness of the people who make big decisions about big policies and big flows of money. And that might be because they're too piloty. They don't link in with the big mobile operators. And just from the experience of being part of the evaluation team for mNutrition, we had loads and loads of meetings with GSMA and some of the mobile operators, and it just became clear that certainly the evaluators were speaking a very different language. The public sector people were speaking a very different language from the business people. Different objectives, different languages, different codes of conduct, everything different. Although actually in reality many of the concepts are very similar, but we just have to get through them in very different languages and cultures. And I think if mobile phones and nutrition are really going to really take off, we have to really understand what's in it for the mobile operators. Can we really drive business to their platforms through these kind of free or semi-free services? And do these services really result in different knowledge, different attitudes, different practice, different behaviors, and actually even different nutrition outcomes? So that's really all I want to say. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be learning, and I'm very happy that we have so many practitioners in the room. Thank you for making time. Come here and share your experience and wisdom with us.
Thanks, Lawrence. Excellent. So the sessions run, there's 3 sessions to the day. The first will focus on content, the second on the platforms and the technology, and the third on impact. I'm sure each will provide us with a lot of opportunity for discussion. We'll have a handful of speakers come and present first, followed by panelists who will come up to the front to give a couple of minutes about their work or their reaction to the speakers as they see it. And then we'll open up the opportunity for asking questions from the floor. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Kyla Stockdale, Senior Project Manager here at GAIN, also very, very closely involved with the work of the global content team of the mNutrition initiative. So Kyla, thank you very much. Oh, I should also say, the GAIN colleague here, Shanze, is our clicker. So if you are speaking, give her a nod if you want things moving
That's
along.
what I was about to ask. Okay, well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming and joining. I appreciate that. And we will start off with a presentation about the mNutrition initiative. As you know, it's the conversation today is much broader than that, but because it has been such a big, large, ambitious undertaking, it does deserve, some attention to delve down into those lessons learned. So that's what I will attempt to present to you today on behalf of our whole consortium. So I thought I should just step back for those of you that are new. Everyone has heard about mNutrition, but just a reminder, the idea was take these existing mobile platforms, whether they're for health or agri, and embed the nutrition content into those services that were already operational and running. So not to recreate the wheel, but use these services, put the nutrition content into them in 8 African countries and 4 in South Asia. Today we've kind of framed the conversation around Africa. That has been where GAIN has implemented on our behalf, and also we framed it that way because the technologies are a bit different than in the South Asia context, so we'll have a different conversation around that. So I wanted to step us back to 2014 when the idea of this initiative came about. And there was a GSMA business intelligence report at that time that said that the primary barrier between bottom of the pyramid users and uptake of content was that it wasn't localized enough. And so enter in GAIN and the consortium to develop this quote-unquote localized content. What does that mean? So we have here these spheres. There's a lot of content available in a local language. There's a lot of content that might be even locally relevant, whether it's in the local language or not. Then there's a smaller portion that has been locally created, and a very small overlap between this all. So we undertook to create localized content. However, there wasn't a very clear idea of who it would be, what kind of partner, what kind of entity that would create this content. And across the project all over, we've created partnerships with local content partners to create this content. But the diversity in capacity of these partners in terms of their focus was really quite varied. So we had some nutrition organizations that were nutrition experts that started to delve into creating mobile content. We had others that were mobile content specialists with no nutrition expertise. So what came across in the project was really different skill sets and really different capacity building depending on the content provider. So I wanted to give you an idea before I delve into the lessons learned of what kind of approach we had to create this localized content. I know that I was anticipating a bigger screen, so I know it's a bit small for you guys to see. But the idea was, what the consortium was to provide was create high quality, factually accurate, and validated content in alignment with global evidence, national priorities, and the local context, and we proposed this method. So the method was going out, sourcing all of this information, making sure that it was evidence-based, factual, tied to these interventions we wanted to undertake, then starting to write messages tied to that, then of course reviewing, and we had these elements of what is validation, validating it, testing it with end users, making sure government was okay with it, making sure it fit into the services, looking at quality control. We would have to have an external check on what parameters are around to ensure that these messages going out are quality, that they are factual, that they are basically good advice, we're not misinforming or misleading people, and then translating into local languages where appropriate too. Then, after all that was done, that was a very iterative process between them all, we would go ahead and publish this content and allow mobile services to use it and embed it within. So I thought that it would be good to delve down into some specific messages so you really get the flavor of what does localization mean. Because as we finish this project, when we look at our body of messages, even between the partners, I think we can delve into the messages and get lost in, is this right, is this wrong, is this localized, is this not? Where's the benchmark on these things? It was pretty cutting ground. So I thought I should read you a few messages so you can think about, oh, how does that strike you? And we can kind of discuss some of the lessons learned from there. So one of the messages, always take your iron tablets. Having low blood anemia during pregnancy might put your life at risk. One of the big tensions on the project was too clinical, too factual, too factually accurate, and not meeting the needs of the end user. But we found that every time we made something palatable to the end user, we would take out anemia, we would strike it out, we would explain it as having low blood. Clinicians who needed to validate it would say, that's wrong. You can't tell people low blood. They do not have low blood. This is factually inaccurate. And we would start going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth again, trying to strike this balance between what the users would understand and what clinicians would accept. There would be examples when washing baby nappies, the water used should be thrown far from the house and the cooking area. We might say, on the surface, is that relevant to our audience? I don't know. Are they living rurally? Are they living urban? Should we be advising just throw the water out? It depends on where they are. It came back to this idea of segmenting the audience. And so we're creating this content, but it was very much tied to the service and the audience that it would go out to. The same, we had a lot of dialogue around being too fat during pregnancy is risky. You may develop pregnancy-induced diabetes, too much sugar in the blood. As we know, even in developing countries, governments are paying attention to NCDs. They want this messaging to go out, but yet they were worried, what if this message on being too fat goes to the masses and women get concerned about being too fat in pregnancy when the real issue might be being underweight? So again, it came back to we can create this content, but how it's tagged in the metadata, how it goes out to people, how the services are segmented, the details lie in that as well. One of the other examples, eggs are a source of iron, and there's no medical proof that they have a harmful effect on your baby's character. That's an example where, user insights from the ground up were able to inform what is a barrier to women eating eggs when they're pregnant. Maybe eggs aren't the best source of iron, but given that they don't have access to meats, maybe it's a small doable action to recommend consumption of eggs. So as you can see, my point here is that a lot of thought went into every single message. And when you start unpacking them, we can all come up with questions, concerns, biases. Is it too technical? Does the user understand it? Is this really the barrier? Is it not? Is this national level or local level? But it was the local content partners that really did the work on figuring that out for us. So it became that quality control was very hard because how these things measure up in both the user's needs and the national government's needs. So I've highlighted here some of the tensions that I've explained through the messages. In creating this localized content, there were quite a few tensions that came up, and we had to find this balance. Localization to which level? Mobile operators are national audiences, so we needed messaging that would be nationally applicable. But if we're talking about behavior change nationwide, Where are the similarities and where are the differences? When GAIN conducted the landscape analyses for the outset of this project, we found that the variation in nutrition status within the same country was, the same as between the countries. So there was as much variation within that one country as across all 12 countries. So it was really about targeting socioeconomic status, how we do that with these messages. There was a big tension around knowledge dissemination versus behavior change. Where is it a role just to provide this knowledge versus hook in everything about the motivations, the barriers, the aspirations? Validation by clinicians and national experts versus users. Where does the threshold lie? We can have it clinically accurate, validated by government, and completely incomprehensible to users because we said gestational diabetes, anemia, all of these terms that are not even naming specific macro or micronutrients, folate, protein, maybe users don't understand that. But without that, clinicians think that it's inaccurate. The final tension was user testing versus user design. In our process, we included user testing. But was that too little, too late? By the time we were checking with the user, we had already framed the message. They didn't have the opportunity to tell us, oh yeah, I understand that, but that's not really the issue I'm concerned about. I don't eat eggs because X. We had already constrained their mind by presenting them with that, and we didn't user design, at least for the content, from the ground up. That said, before I share some thoughts that we can consider when we discuss with the panelists or way forward, I did want to give you the highlights so that we can really know, mNutrition by the highlights. I've shared a lot of the nitty-gritty details around content, but we have learned significant lessons throughout the project about the potential for using mobile in nutrition interventions, and that the potential is still very large to do so. As big as the mNutrition project has been, it has touched the surface in terms of potential. I think we'll hear from that when we listen to the platforms of engagement that are possible with the users. We built local content partner capacity in many cases, and now several of these local content partners have contracts with mobile operators to continue supplying nutrition information, which is fascinating for us. The content we created is already being leveraged for new products. In Mozambique, it's been embedded into new products and packaged up as 1 minute of nutrition. So this same nationally government accepted messaging can be used in other mediums or used again and repurposed. So finally, I wanted to share some thoughts that we may discuss in the panel and thoughts about the way forward. I want to think about beyond SMS. Yes, we have included other mediums in mNutrition, but it's primarily been SMS-based. And as you know, 160 characters to communicate factually accurate, evidence-based nutrition information, also locally relevant, that meets the aspirations, motivations, barriers of national audiences. That's a lot to pack into one bullet point, never mind 160 characters SMS. So very ambitious. How do we target our efforts going forward, whether it's by medium or whether we use SMS but campaign-based or information-based? The idea of the primacy of user insights. In the project, the user design extended very much to services, which was great, but in terms of the content, we had to inform ourselves with the user testing, which was at the end. In most cases, especially where the project was advanced in later stages, we integrated that ourselves and went out to the field to gather the user insights because we realized the content was staying pretty high level and generic across countries because we are taking the global evidence, factually based, putting it in local language, bringing in other things. But you'll hear after me from Dean at ThinkPlace, who helped and assisted on the project gathering some of these insights, so later messaging could be more, really tied to the user needs. And finally, the idea of mobile as a complementary tool, used in alignment with other things. One of the great things about the mNutrition project was all of the interventions that we spoke about in the messages were aligned with government priorities already. So it wasn't standalone, it was to drive uptake of these nationally accepted interventions, and mobile can complement in that way to do that. So, thank you.
Dean Johnson from Think Place. Dean and his team took part in mNutrition, as Kyla mentioned, looking specifically at more user-centered design and user experiences at the local level in Ghana.
Ghana, Tanzania, and also.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Good morning. So my name is Dean Johnson. I'm from Think Place, Kenya. We're a strategic innovation company globally, but we have an office in Kenya. And we sort of practice human-centered design, but also other sort of strategic innovation tools or methods in order to create a raft of different sort of projects or outcomes in the developing world across nutrition, health, financial inclusion, and other things as well. So simply put, yeah, we humanize complexity. So we work in places that are quite complex. And we believe that the solutions that we should design come from listening to users and immersing ourselves in their world. Today I want to talk to you about how we are rethinking the way that we work on public health projects and behaviour change. And I'm going to give a few examples of that. So this is some new thinking that we've been doing, and actually one of the projects I'm going to go through is actually a project in train as well. But I think this is really important because when you're designing content or any new innovation or product or service that's being introduced into the developing world, we think that there's some ways that people are doing that at the moment that maybe aren't being as effective as they could be. So we've got some initial thoughts we want to share with everyone. So just as a show of hands, who's heard of human-centered design before? That's fantastic. Great. Okay, good. So I'll just quickly talk through what I think some of the benefits of using this in this sort of context are, in particular for developing content or new products or services. The first thing to say is that it's very immersive. So what that means is we don't go and do surveys with people. We actually live with people. We sometimes spend a week in a community with a family. And this allows us to get past what we see as reported behaviours versus actions, to see actual behaviours. And we think this is fundamental to designing successful behaviour change interventions. So I'm going to go through a few examples. This was in Tanzania with GAIN, and we came in at the end to do some testing around some messages that had been designed. And as sort of Carla was mentioning, we sort of had this balance between something that resonates with users, but also had to have that sort of medical or sort of health aspect to it as well. So the first thing on the left, we did some really quick conversations with some mothers. This was around maternal nutrition, and overwhelmingly mothers were telling us that there was a demand for nutrition information, that they would pay for it, that they would use it, and they would consume it, which we thought was great. But then we did some observations. So I wasn't able to take a photo of the actual space, but we spoke to the director of this facility in Tanzania, and he said, we said to him, everyone seems to really want nutrition information and health education. And he showed us where there was about, I think, 40 mothers sitting in a waiting room, like a waiting area, waiting to be seen by the doctor. I think they were sitting there for 4 or 5 hours sometimes. And right next to it, there was an open area where they were providing health education, and there was no one in there. So these mothers would prefer to sit with their friends and their family and to have discussions about what's happening and social discussions as opposed to take that. So a really big distinction between, or disparity between actual behaviour and motivation and sort of seeing it for real. This is on a recent project. We're working in Kenya around the uptake of PrEP, which is preventive prophylaxis, a pill that prevents HIV if you take it every day. And we looked at some of the quantitative studies coming out, and we saw things like 80%, this is high-risk population, so sex workers, men who have sex with men, and adolescent and young women. And the reports were saying that there's about an 80% adherence to condom use all the time. And we did some research in those populations, and we did a really interesting train of questioning. We asked people, this was with a sex worker, would you pay, if a client offered you an extra, I'll use US dollars, $10 US, would you have sex with a condom? She said, absolutely not. Like, I need to be here for my children, I don't want to get HIV. We said, what about $100? Absolutely not. So what about $1,000? Absolutely not. There's no way I'm going to do that. And then we said, what about if your child was sick and they're in hospital and you need to pay the hospital bill? She goes, in a second. So again, what you can see is this big disparity between quantitative research and reported behaviour versus actual behaviour in reality. This is a project we've just completed with GAIN as well in Mozambique. We're doing some research around adolescent girls and mobile usage and also nutrition. And again, we heard from a lot of people about, actually there's a lot of protein being consumed in Mozambique. It's quite common. And when we did really flash quick interviews with girls, they would say, yes, absolutely, I have lots of protein in my diet. But again, we actually, our team went through initiation rites for that community and spent a lot of time immersed in that community. And this is just a photo of actually what a lot of protein looks like. So I think you can't really see it, but I believe that's a fish head in the bottom left corner. So very low protein intake. So again, a very big disparity between reported behaviour and actual behaviour. And we're going to do an experiment now just to prove this point. And it's a bit provocative, but just bear with me. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so if you turn to the person next to you and have a discussion about the last time that you had unprotected sex, or when you did so, were you under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and how many sexual partners have you done that with? I'm not going to ask you to actually do that. But interestingly enough, we ask users all the time in the developing world to do the same thing. And yet we expect them to be telling us the truth or telling us about sort of their actual behaviours. Okay, next slide. Don't answer the question. But I actually gave this similar, I quite like this experiment. I gave it to someone in Sydney to do, and she didn't know to tell people not to answer. And like Twitter went crazy, people saying it's unethical, etc. So we have to have this slide now. But I think the point is that, you know, why do we expect people to be this honest with us? There's a lot of reasons, in particular in sexual health, but also nutrition as well. Just as a quick example, these are some cards that we use when we do research just to start the conversation. So we have a deck and we answer, and then the user answers as well. So things like, what's one thing about you that I'd never think to ask you? Or tell us about the best advice you've received. And we like this because it starts to sort of balance that power imbalance when we do research. Great. So one of the sort of cons, I suppose, of human-centered design, it does take a long time. So if you imagine a space where you have a few different sort of segments of people you want to understand and research, and you need to spend a few days or a week to start building that trust, it can take a lot of time. So one thing we're doing is we've partnered with a behavioural economics firm. We're using them to sort of help target some of this deep dive immersive research. I'm going to talk next about how we've done that. So this project is currently in process. It's the project I mentioned in Kenya around HIV, but there's a lot of similarities to nutrition and mNutrition, and also designing content for users. So the project in a nutshell was creating demand and uptake of PrEP, which is preventative prophylaxis, in high-risk populations in Kenya, and there's some of the populations that we're working with. So the first step for us was to go out and to start researching with some of these key population groups, with sex workers, men who have sex with men, and adolescent girls, just to understand what are some of the differences in that population in motivations and behaviour, but really looking at how we might segment that population a little bit differently. We used Basara then to do a quantitative analysis using behavioural science to start thinking about how would you segment this population based on a few things. So they looked at behaviours, they looked at risk perception, they looked at decision making, and then some of the more demographic type ways to segment a population. We think this is really important because often populations are segmented in ways that maybe actually don't make sense for behaviour change or for creating products or services. What we found actually, well, one of our hypotheses was that we'd be able to segment the population on the barriers that they're experiencing. So this was around sort of HIV, but if you think about nutrition, there are some fundamental barriers for people changing their behaviour to nutrition. And you know, awareness, which is something that messaging is fantastic for, isn't always the biggest barrier. Sometimes it's actually the last barrier. So there's things like people who don't listen to messaging. They trust their friends and family. They trust their neighbours. They want to continue behaviours that have been existing in their family or their community for a very long time. So you can sort of put a bit of a hierarchy to those barriers and help think strategically about, well, which barriers are these messages actually addressing. So we did that, and actually the barrier, all of those segmentations I mentioned didn't come through. So the data actually came through and said these populations are a lot more similar than we thought. So there wasn't really any way that we could segment them based on behaviours or any of this quantitative analysis, which at first we thought was a bit of a failure, but it's actually, I think, quite a success. It means that there's something else going on in this population that we can think about. So we started thinking about the diffusion of innovation model. And again, show of hands, who's heard of that term before? Okay, great. Very, very great. I did this presentation recently, no one did, so this is good. We started looking at this and thinking about, well, within these key populations, who are our innovators and who are our early adopters? And we started to try and understand them a little bit better. Because using this model, we really want to look at creating social norms.
What are the percentages referred to?
Sure.
Are they a certain population? Or?
Yeah, I'll explain quickly. So the idea with this model essentially is that within any population, so Apple actually uses this, it's sort of very fundamental to their strategy. You have people who are the innovators, so they're the really fast-acting people. They're usually the ones creating new ideas, new behaviours. They're very keen to try new things and to experiment with new things. And these people are really the influencers, and they influence the sort of early adopters, so the people that want to jump on new trends quite quickly. The early majority are people who are quite apathetic, so they don't really have a passion for or against things. So what they need is they need to see some of their role models or some of the people they trust or listen to adopting a new behaviour. Once they see it, then they'll just follow suit. And there's a sort of a tipping point around here, which they call a chasm, and that's if you get enough of that population to adopt something new, the rest will follow. So the late majority, they want to see that most of the population are doing something different, that it's successful, that there's no risk, etc., and then they'll adopt. And then you have laggards that are very hard people to change their mind. So these people are still using rotary phones as an example. So that's sort of the numbers. It's been, I think it was 1962 it was developed, so it's been used in a lot of different, in private sector marketing, private sector product design, etc. A very similar approach is used, but we haven't seen it as much.
The numbers refer to a particular...
Sorry, the percentage of the population.
No, but do they refer to, is that a generic number across lots of different populations, or is that in Tanzania? Or
Sure. No, it's generic across all populations. So it was a study that was done that basically proved within a population of people, you'll see roughly the split in that population. And we're actually sort of seeing this quantitatively in our study as well, pretty accurately. Running a bit over, so I might sort of... Yeah, so basically the theory is then, and actually one massive challenge I see in development in particular is often we want to focus here. We want to focus on those people that when you look at them, they look like they're very unfortunate or disadvantaged. And often our programs really look at, well, how do we change those people and change their behaviour? But actually we think the fastest way to do that is by starting here and then moving down the spectrum. So that's where we're up to in this project. I just want to quickly say what the next steps are. And again, this is very, it's the same approach that we'd use for messaging or for any mNutrition intervention. But the first thing is to understand who these people are and start being able to, if you like, point a camera at them. So identify them in a population. And then we want to look at, we need to design something, an intervention to get those people believing in what we believe in. And then once we do that, we want to give them tools to help amplify that behaviour, like down the diffusion of innovation. And then once we do that, it's actually, we're looking at, so we believe we can measure that as well. So we think we can actually measure the speed of that diffusion and see it hit those people that we want to hit and see how quickly it is going through the population. Next slide. That's me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Great, thank you. So if I could, Dean, invite you to speak up here kindly to join us. And also, I'd like to invite our panellists for the first session. So not quite the same as it says on your piece of paper. Steve Kingswell will be replacing Catherine, as it says down here. So Steve from Everyone Mobile from Dixie, and Catherine Woods, Director of Strategy and Development at Development Media International. Pippa Yates, Strategy and Experience Design Lead at the Freakout World Foundation, and Clemency Fraser, Senior Project Manager at BBC Media Action. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. So, starting with Steve, we'll run through the panellists who have joined us to give a couple of minutes on their experiences and reaction to the speakers we've seen so far.
Thanks. So I'm Steve Kingswell. I'm COO for Everyone Mobile. Just a very briefest introduction. Everyone Mobile is a digital and professional services company working in the social impact arena, and we built a mobile platform for the delivery of our services. And what's been really interesting in this section, sort of focusing on content, is is the importance of content and the importance of messaging. And I mean, the first thing that came to my mind from Dean's presentation was how important it is to do your research, how important it is to really understand your users, and then to design your content accordingly. And one question I have for Dean, which may sort of kick off a discussion area with this, was relating to scale. Clearly, if you look at human-centered design, you're getting a lot more involved with people on a one-to-one basis, on a one-to-group basis. And I'm interested in asking, how you handle scaling and making sure you have a representative group when you're having to deal at a more detailed level. Because I think one of the benefits that we all get from surveying and the sort of more traditional quantitative and qualitative focus groups that we all work in when we're trying to develop a program and design a program to get the outcomes we want. Traditionally, we're looking at representative samples, we're looking at identifying the personas and different target audiences, and we use the sort of surveying tools to do that, and that's kind of statistically proven to get some level of results, but it does have the issues that I think you brought up very well in your presentation. So I'm interested in how you handle scaling things up to get a good representative coverage in the target populations you're looking at.
Sure.
Hold on to that thought.
All right, I'll write some notes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Steve.
Yeah, great. So my name is Pippa Yates, and I'm the Strategy and Experience Design lead at Breakout.org. So we build mobile technologies to improve the health and well-being of people in low and middle income countries. And I'm just going to share a little bit of our experience around content localization in the maternal health space. So we run a program in South Africa with the National Department of Health that sends SMS messages to pregnant women who register at government clinics. And it was really interesting having that experience and localizing really evidence-led content from partners such as Baby Center into those SMS messages. We then are expanding to other countries. So we're looking at in Nigeria and Uganda at the moment. And the entire experience of localizing that content for the other markets was an interesting one. First of all, for us, and I think this is mimicked in the focus on knowing your user, our content in South Africa was focused at the mother. In Nigeria, we actually need to look at where the locus of control is around who's making the nutritional decisions in the household. And in that case, particularly around maternal health, in the markets we're looking at, sometimes it's the father or the head of the household, or even the mother-in-law in a lot of cases. So we then had to look at not only localizing the content for the Nigerian kind of situation, but also then for a different target audience. On top of that, we believe really a lot in the tonal quality and the branding of that content. So we develop brands that go along with our programs that have their own style and tonal control. So you need to then layer that on top of who you're targeting in the audience. And what we find specifically with translation and working with different content producers in different countries is it's often that tonal quality and that style of writing that's lost in translations. And that's a big problem for us in terms of really resonating from a cultural perspective, talking like people talk instead of just having your really well-crafted English, in most cases, content that you've put a lot of effort into the tone and the style of it, also making it medically correct and factual from this perspective. And then having that translated, often you lose out on that tonal quality. So what we're doing in a lot of our programs is we have a linguistic kind of quality assurance process that the content goes through before it goes live, a lot of cases. And then now we're actually doing back translation on a lot of the content as kind of a spot checking mechanism to make sure that when you're producing a lot of content, it's obviously expensive to do that across everything, but that we're making sure we're picking out those tonal and those style differences that actually have a huge impact on the quality of their content across different countries.
I don't understand what you mean by tonal. What's that?
So what I mean is it could be an authoritative tone or friendly tone, depending who the audience member is and who they most likely relate to or who's their biggest influences. You want to use a different tone. So to a mother in some countries, we might be using a grandmother and that kind of friendly, warming tone. Whereas looking at fathers, we may be using more a clinical, authoritative tone to the content.
So it's not colloquialism.
No, it's really tonal and style of the writing.
Also, a question. You talked about branding and that this is important, and this also emerged a bit in the impact evaluation and the qualitative baseline. That, for example, in Tanzania, people trusted government sources much more. So it would make sense to brand or to send the messages from the government or from a health worker from the government or something.
Definitely.
Do you have some examples for different countries, perhaps?
Yeah, so because we work with governments a lot of, and they require certain branding elements in all the work they do, there are some requests. I think what Kyla said around the 160 characters, including trusted brands and your messaging and all the cultural relevance in 160 characters is really hard. So in South Africa, with Mom Connect, we built up this trusted brand and we use just MC in the beginning of every message to indicate to the user that this is coming from a trusted source. In Nigeria, we're actually using the brand Hello Mama, and although that's associated with the federal health system and other partners, we don't explicitly mention Federal Ministry of Health in the messaging. And we're going to see what impact that's going to have on the trust. So that's not, we haven't compared them across countries as yet.
Great, thank you, Petra. Catherine.
Hi, thank you for some excellent presentations. So I'll just introduce myself very briefly. I'm Catherine Will. I work for an organisation called DMI. DMI uses radio, television and mobile phones to change behaviours, and we've just recently completed a randomised controlled trial where we've demonstrated that it is possible to change behaviours using mass media alone, using radio alone. That work was done in Burkina Faso, where we've been messaging on nutritional messages for the last 5 years, largely using radio, but also doing some work with mobile phones, particularly creating content that's shared by mobile phones. We also put programs in Mozambique, Tanzania, and DRC. So that's DMI, and our approach, just to sort of explain how we approach localizing our messages. We do carry out lots of formative research with our target audience, carrying out focus groups, looking at the grey literature, the published literature, as well as the quantitative data to find out what current behaviours are and try to establish what the key barriers to behaviour change are. We then write a message brief which very much crystallises all this research, highlighting what the key barriers to behaviour change, the facilitators are. It comments on the social norms, as well as comments on what the entourage of the decision makers might be. So maybe if we're targeting women and nutritional behaviours, we refer to whether or not who has the decision-making powers, as we've already heard, whether it's the mother-in-law or the husband, for example. And we also highlight the call to action. The reason why we spend quite a lot of time creating this very clear message brief is then we hand these to our scriptwriters. So we produce 1-minute spots for radio, TV, or to be shared by mobile. So we're not restricted to 160 characters, which makes things easier, but we do restrict ourselves to 1 minute. And we also very much focus on creating dramatic spots. So we are very much creating dramas because we want to really engage listeners, we want them to stay with us, we want them to listen to the story, and that we hope to change social norms by exposing populations to these stories again and again and again. So the script writers that we have are very well trained teams of script writers in the countries that we're working in. So we're Burkinabe script writers, Mozambican script writers, and they look at this message brief. They can very clearly see what the key message, what the key behaviour that we want to increase is. They can see what the key barriers to those behaviours are, and they can see what social norms that we're trying to increase are and improve. So these script writers write these dramas and then they get acted out. And we've also currently been sending our script writers into the villages to have these immersion weeks so they can really observe behaviours in the communities as well. And to talk a little bit about how we localise the content, we always produce the content in local languages. So in Burkina, we are working in 10 languages. And we find that what we find is quite interesting looking across the multi-countries that we're working in. So some messages that are more call to action, say, why don't you try eating more of this type of nutritious food, you might need to make it very localized because you need to reflect a food that is available in that area, in that region at that time. So they would become very localized. For some other messages, it's possible to be more generic. So if we look across Mozambique, Tanzania, and Burkina Faso, breastfeeding is very high, exclusive breastfeeding is low, and that's widely understood to be because people think that you need the babies need water and additional liquids, and that's common across all the target groups in all 3 countries. So we found that there you could actually use quite similar messaging for the spots. And one thing I just thought would be really to get any insight from the pair of you would be, Dean, one of the challenges that we found, particularly with breastfeeding, is that reported behaviours aren't particularly accurate, particularly for exclusive breastfeeding. So women will report that they are breastfeeding exclusively, but actually we find that we get lots of different levels of exclusive breastfeeding reported, and then actually observed behaviours is vastly different from reported behaviours because of the courtesy bias. That's one area that I'm really interested to find some insight about. And then the other thing that struck me when I was listening to Kyla's presentation was this idea of how we address rumours. So one of the key barriers to behaviour change that we find is the rumours that are existing within the community. For example, pregnant women don't eat eggs because it will calm their babies, or their development will be impaired. But one of the evidence from other countries that suggests that in order to counter that rumour, you shouldn't repeat it. And so we struggle with that, because if you don't repeat it, how do you counter it? So sometimes it's possible to sort of affirmatively say the opposite, but other times it gets difficult. And I don't know whether you've got any evidence that by repeating a rumour in order to say it's not true, whether that ends up propagating it, and whether that you have any evidence about that. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Hang on to those thoughts. Clemency.
Thank you very much. Yes, thanks for inviting me here today. I should introduce myself first before I go on. My name is Clem Fraser. I'm from BBC Media Action. I think we do quite similar work. We use media and communication to work in areas such as behaviour change, attitudes, knowledge. We are the development charity as part of the BBC. We work across 4 main areas, which is health, governance, resilience, humanitarian response. And it's really interesting hearing both of the presentations and about the project today, because I think we share quite kind of equal passions and interests and challenges with that as well. And that is around ensuring that our content is localized and relevant and resonates and has the right effect for our audiences. You were mentioning human-centered. We definitely also do that. We call them audiences, I guess, because we're media and we sort of look at our beneficiaries as audiences. I just wanted to sort of thinking about the kind of the localization and just to have a look at some of the sort of like the learnings that you were looking at in your presentation, Karen. The first one was the user testing versus user design of the content. And I think that what we find is that that's all one thing. It's all looked upon as the designing of the content and the testing of the content. It's got to start, as you were saying, it starts with the research, it starts with understanding our audience. And we need to understand what it is that stops people from doing things or thinking things or behaving in ways, what then is going to help motivate them to overcome those. And then as we're learning that and we start designing our content, we just test it out. Have we got that right? Did we get that right? Are we still there? Are we going on? Is it all happening? No, we need to change a bit here. This is all happening because I think I think we can all agree in what everybody's said here as well, is that it's just so nuanced and so, and as you were saying also, there's not just difference between different countries, but within those countries as well. So we actually, before this presentation today, I spoke to our team in India who have an enormous project, mobile phone project, for health and women in pregnancy. And it's when we were saying to them, what do you do? Because we're in one particular, we're in Bihar in India, but it's upscaling, so it's going to be across the nation. But even within Bihar, populations are enormous, and there's different languages, there's different contexts and different everything. So, and it sounds also similar to what you were saying, is that when thinking about localizing content, they've got sort of 4 really key bits that they just have to do every time. And as you say, we have writers, from the national teams, etc., from those areas who are immersed in those communities, who know those communities. Saying is that the language has to be right. And that's talking, as you were saying, also, it's not just about understanding, it's the tone. It's the using the right kind of words, the right kind of phrases that people can kind of connect with. It has to be engaging. So you're saying about the kind of the clinical thing as well, as if to say, if people aren't really kind of gripped by it or interested, then no matter how interesting and informative the information is, it ain't going anywhere. It has to be rooted in social and cultural context. It has to have those different, whatever those particular areas believe in or feel that's important to them, and it has to be tested throughout. And I think that's especially important with mobile phones because of the fact that once you're in, you're done. That's once your content is happening. It's not like when we make radio programs, we get audience feedback and we can go, oh, okay, that's not quite happening, we'll change that. It's got to be there. Just very quickly, actually, I won't go too long, but is that, for example, for this project in India, is that we were designing this mobile phone content that found that it was going to be aimed at women, but found that women didn't have control of mobile phones. Their husbands did. And not only did they, when they did have the mobile phone, it was usually to take care of the charging up of it, and they certainly didn't use it to text or receive texts because illiteracy was very high. So pushing text messages and information that way is not going to happen. And so all they really used it for was to receive phone calls, probably from the husband, giving whatever instructions or updates or whatever. So if we were going to reach the people that we needed to, then we needed to make telephone calls. And so we designed voice messages, as I say, all with the right language, the right blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying we got everything 100% right, that's not what it's all about, but that's how we aim to get to our audience. And I think I've got my figures down here that I hope is right. And so far we make weekly calls, and so far we've got about 1.6 million calls being made to women every week in 6 different languages at the moment. And one of the other ones I just wanted to very quickly move on to, then I will be quiet, is knowledge and dissemination versus behaviour change. Now, I think that, as I think that we're all sort of agreeing here, is that knowledge has an extremely important role to play, but without understanding the barriers and the motivators, then the knowledge isn't really going to, play its role. And I think one of the examples that I can think of, this isn't actually a mobile phone one, but it is a radio one. And I worked in South Sudan for a while, and we were working with UNICEF in a cholera outbreak. And so they said, we were working with local radio stations across the country, and they said, look, we need to get this information out. You guys are working with radio stations, you can produce the content, let's work together and get this stuff happening. But they luckily had a lot of information ready. And with these messages that were going out, is that we had to really make sure that it was local, because in one area, that cholera was spreading because of dirty water, and they didn't understand how to keep what was clean water. What they were being told was clean water and how to clean water, and really what had happened. In another area, not too far away, it was being spread because of open defecation. And so it would have, if we'd kind of done sort of some blanket thing, it would have completely missed. And they did open defecation because it was to demonstrate how well they were being fed and how wealthy the family was. And so there was a whole lot of story behind that before actually just pushing stuff out that we would have missed in quite a large area. But anyway, that's
fantastic. Thank you for that. Those experiences and insights. So I'll just allow Kyla and Dean to respond to those first questions which have been put to them, and then I'll open it up to the floor for further questions.
I think that maybe I'm still hearing things through my same bias, but every comment, I feel that we're still discussing the same tension. The promise of mobile is the reach, that it can reach so many. The promise is scale. The reason we were putting it in national audiences is because we can then go out and reach those numbers. In Tanzania, through Wazazi Independently, they have 1 million users signed on to that, with the tension of, if we're really going to create change, can it be at that national level? Yes, mobile can be used as a tool in a project for messaging a discrete subset of the community on a subset of behaviors. We can get that granular, but it still resides with the tension of scale. The reason we had designed these generic messages to begin with was that they would be put into multiple services and used across the country. So for me, in all of our comments and discussions, the tension is still there. Mobile, the reach is there. So how do we get this right balance where it's granular enough and touches and segmented enough? I think we've also spoken a lot about the health side of things, whereas the mAgri program is much more developed on segmenting the audience, because farmer X in egg ecological zone Y needs that precise information when the rainfall is going to come then, and the health side isn't quite as segmented yet. So for me, that's my summary point before I leave it open to.
I mean, I'd like just to respond to that point, actually, because Everyone Mobile's worked with a project in Nigeria for gender equality related change at scale. And I think you've got to make a decision whether you're going to address a scale audience and then work with various adopters on the subject matter you're working with, or whether you're focusing very local and you get into the very local questions of local language and local customs and if it's nutrition, local foods, etc., etc. But using mobile for reach, is very, very doable. Connecting with social media, connecting with non-digital sort of interventions in terms of sort of publicity and advertising in other ways, pulling all those things together, you can create huge amounts of reach. So we reach something like 60 to 70 million people in Nigeria with gender equality messaging through online and social media. The trick then is about engagement. How do you capture once you've reached those people? How do you capture them? How do you get them to engage with your content? And that's really important then about this whole issue of clinical messaging versus something that's of interest to them. So in this example, we created entertaining content that was around celebrity, around different elements of the messaging about where we thought the user journey would come from just early adopters right through to somebody who was going to become passionate about the topic. And the program also took cognizance of creating an enabling environment, because whether you consider the enabling environment your school, your family environment, the political environment, your religious, traditional leaders, local context, that enabling environment is what enables you to feel that you are able to adopt this messaging, you're able to get involved. So one thing that's really important with the engagement is to let people know that other people are engaging. And then you get a situation where I'm not on my own. One of the real benefits of mobile is that in one sense it's very private. So something you're not allowed to do in your family, or it's not generally accepted, you can do on a mobile phone if you have your mobile phone in privacy where no one else can actually see what you're doing. It's one of the big benefits. One of the downsides of it is you're online, it's just you and the content. Like, who else is out there? Who else are you sharing it with? So to create some form of sharing experience, social sharing, and the feeling that you're not alone, you've got a lot of people working with you. This is another contextual piece that mobile does very, very well. So, yeah, I think taking your point, the really important thing to do is look at scale, and then work and engage in multiple ways and continually take feedback from the user base, so that you can start to segment people within your target audience, and you can start to design specific content, take people through the different user journey elements that you're designing for your program. So hopefully that's sort of interesting in terms of how we've addressed a scale project.
I was going to offer it to Dean.
I'll be quick. I'll just talk quickly to your point, Steve, about scale and being representative. And before I do, I think it's really important to stress how big a problem actually reported versus actual behavior is. Because that understanding of your audience or your user group comes usually at the start, which is good, of a program, of an intervention design. And you can be operating on a completely opposite truth of actually what's happening. And I see that a lot. I see that in the majority of the projects we start talking about. If I use that example in Tanzania, where we were trying to understand some barriers to behavior change, but also uptake of this mobile education. And there was an assumption that it was cost. There was an assumption that it was access. And that was what the reported behavior was telling us. If we had operated on that, and that wasn't the problem. We found the problem was that the community narrative, the trust in your mother who said, look, this is how you were brought up. You don't need to change. Don't listen to them. You can still eat maize meal. You don't need vegetables. That was the real behavior. And that was, in our opinion, the biggest barrier. So you can really set off intervention design or a program on a really, really bad foot if you start sort of trusting or looking at that reported behavior too much. But as far as being representative, I think what we're talking about with these types of things is really raw, deep human sort of condition and psyche and attitudes. And there's a saying that you don't need 100 people to tell you the stairs creak. And usually what we find when we do research is that when you do that really deep level of research in a segment or an archetype group, you will hear the same things after sort of 4 or 5 immersive experiences with the user. And actually anything over that, you're kind of starting to waste time. So I think, and then we don't just trust that and then design something and invest in that idea. We also do testing and things as well. So you might do a experiment. So in that project I was talking about, I won't go into full detail, but with those sex workers, we find the sort of link with being a mother and providing for your children is a really strong sort of motivation. So actually, we're going to go into a community group of the target group and actually start putting some messaging or some sort of information into that community that sort of uses that as a bit of a lever. And we're going to see if it starts to have some traction and take on in a really short period of time, in a week. So just to start validating some of that. So we don't just purely operate on that assumption. We also go through a testing with it. And just I think it was responding to the point here about scale as well. I think, and again, another big problem is that if I think about the diffusion of innovation, again, very frequently I see people or see organizations focusing on the highest need. And usually, almost always, that highest need group have the highest amount of barriers. So therefore, they're in that sort of laggard or late majority sort of portion of the population. These people are also, I think, most influenced by social norms. So if you go in and target them, you could almost say that the optics of it doesn't look great, but the fastest way to reach those people to change their behavior isn't to focus on them first. It's actually to focus on sort of that upstream, which is a very provocative and challenging thing, especially for a donor or for anyone. But yeah, I think it's really important to sort of scale change.
Great, okay, I am going to open it up to the floor. I can see some hands going up already. Gosh, we've got 4 up already. If I take you in the centre there. If you'd like to introduce your name and organisation and your question and who in particular you might want to target it to. Great.
Yeah, this has been excellent. My name is Dave Eastman. I'm the founder of mNutrition. What about thinking about the kind of phones that people have? Because a Nokia is really different from an iPhone. I don't have anything to
Well, I mean, the first thing that's important is device detection. You need to know what your audience has got. And you also need, I think, to make a decision. There is, bottom of the pyramid and an audience that is going to have a complete range of accessibility to your content. So one's going to architect one's solution around the very basic phone that will only handle text, and therefore you need some form of text or voice messaging capability, and that's the way you're going to have to design your program, and you're going to have to design how you make engaging content around the constraints of whether it's 160 characters or data cost and that side of things. The next level up is a basic feature phone, which has internet-enabled capability. What we do is we design we're a web-based organisation fundamentally, albeit that we bring in voice and SMS within our delivery solutions. But when you're dealing with a feature phone, again, one has to design one's communication and content around low data and make sure that you have a responsive capability. So that if someone comes on with a smartphone, they get graphics, they get smartphone layout, they get swiping ability, all the things that they're used to. It's a status symbol to have a high-value phone in many African countries. But what we also found, getting back to sort of users, is we've run workshops where users have walked in with their smartphones and they don't know how to use them. Yeah. And they only use them for calling and various things. So you say to them, you go onto this URL and you get this blank look back and you go to the website, it's www, and then you find a quarter of the audience has managed to get there and the other 3/4 don't know how to find the browser to get to the place you want them to get. So absolutely, device detection, segmentation of user capability as their sort of starting place is absolutely essential to any program design.
Just quickly add as well, I think it's important to think about device as a design constraint, not a design brief. And what I mean by that is, if you use M-Pesa as an example, I mean, that's an example of a platform a product that really is addressing the same user need, but it does sort of go through in a smartphone. It's also in a feature phone. We just recently did a project which was a really complicated fundraising product in Kenya. And actually, we found that once we knew understood the users and we understood what we were trying to change or what we were trying to create or what value we were trying to create, it was actually not too hard to then design that for specific platforms. So to design for a feature phone, for the web, and also for a smartphone. So I think don't maybe put that as a sort of design brief at the start. Just consider it towards the end when you need to start sort of designing that.
I think we're going to be able to talk more too about this subject on the platform design in session 2. I think, at least from the mNutrition perspective, that's why there was a focus on SMS, because that was the technology people were using, as well as some voice messaging and translation into local language via voice for literacy concerns. But definitely, I mean, it's easy to point out all of the limitations of SMS, but it's still like working within the parameters that the majority of people were familiar with.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'll go to the next question. Julian?
Hi, my name is Julian Serko. I work for an organization called Triggerize. We build mobile platforms, do payments, all sorts of other things. So I have a question about, these insights that mobile phones reach lots of people are not very hard to come across, and there's many people who did come across this, including, the barrier of entry into this space is really low. Anyone with a computer can actually write messages to people, and they do. So if you take anyone's phone, you go to Nigeria and you take anyone's phone, they have messages about how to increase their chances in romantic kind of pursuit, how to pay their debts, how to win $1 million in a lottery. There's so much messages that they get, and the quality and reliability of this message is very. You're one of those messages, basically. We are one of those messages. When someone opens their phone, they have 200 SMSs or voice calls, even worse. I want to meet that person in any kind of place in the world that enjoys receiving a call from a phone. I just want to meet that person. Press 1, So how do you deal with this? You send messages to people that are fundamentally spam. Yeah. Those messages come at times at places where these people have other things to do. Mm-hmm. And you're basically creating more noise along with 100 other people who promote stuff in this community. How do you deal with it?
I think it goes back to the branding conversation that we had. So, for example, in Tanzania, when the service sends out the messages, it's branded as the Ministry of Health. So it's like a short code that, on the top of your phone when you're receiving the message, it says MOSH, Ministry of Health Social Welfare. So it's known thing. But in answer to your question, I think that's one of the reasons why GSMA was interested to work in this space, because this is where our mandate of factually accurate, high quality, evidence-based messaging came from contexts where it could be anyone. I could be, on my own phone, I have a roster of, thousands of phone numbers, me sending out messages, eat your veggies today, they will make your girlfriend fall in love with you and you'll have an amazing sex life, something like this. I could send this out. So it was in response to make sure that they're factually accurate, evidence-based. So I just wanted to highlight that. That's where we've come to, and then we've ended up with really clinical things, maybe not engaging, but it was precisely this space of spam, of junk, of people being misinformed that we were trying to work with.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? So in Nigeria, to get around that, because I think a lot of development work forgets that they exist within this media ecosystem that is out of their control and there's a lot of spam. In Nigeria, our system is not SMS, it's voice messages, and we actually have a jingle that plays in the beginning of the phone call that is not only used for brand recognition, that this is a Hello Mama service, but it's also so that the husband can hand the phone to the wife, and it gives them a minute or two to do that. So we use stuff like that to try and help. I think on top of that, it's really essential in the human-centered design process to uncover what are those trust issues with online experiences and what is that ecosystem that person lives within, so that you can try and work around it. Never going to be perfect, but there are little tricks that you can do in terms of trust.
Golly, I know you've been dying to say something for our
I won't. If you, okay. No. No, it was actually So in response to yours, there is that I think is part of our research when we're talking about right at the beginning of the project, and part of that, as well as finding out the audience, is how they use media, and that also how they use their phones, who uses it, when they use it, what puts them off, what makes them, so we can help try and understand some of what's going to do that thing of, thank you very much, see you later. But also is that I think in most of our projects, or all of our projects where we have mobile phones, is we have complementary work going on at the same time. So we have people on the ground working directly with communities, and so opening up dialogue, running sort of community groups. We produce maybe radio programs or something like that to help kind of drive everybody, and so it's sort of like builds up an understanding that people can start talking, and it does become aware, and they can understand what is happening. Because and I think part of that is also trying to make it engaging and stand out, so they don't go, no, thank you very much, but they're aware of what's happening as well with the other work that we carry out.
Wow.
One quick reaction from.
I'll be very quick.
Yeah.
There's an analogy with, I think you'll see 2,000 advertisements today. I think it's a rough statistic like that. There's a lot of similarities, I think, as well. So I think the answer, I have to say, is be creative as well. So, do what advertisers do on YouTube, but actually contextualize it to roughly who they know you are, and make it really creative, make it stand out, be provocative.
I'll be really quick too. There's push messaging, there's pull messaging. If you're pushing stuff to people, then you're going to get spam as a reaction. We get very hard to get more than very single figure percentages responses to SMSing push. If you get pull and you get people interested in the content, and the minute you start a two-way conversation, you're now validating what you're talking about. And this whole thing about clinical messaging, if you send a message out, people don't quite understand it, what they need is a second chance to go, what do you mean? And then you answer that, you qualify the context of it, and then you grab people and you've got them captured in that context. And then you can start a meaningful conversation. Mobile allows that, but you need to build up a two-way messaging process to do it.
Thank you very much. Panos, hi.
I'm Panos Lucas from JSMA, mNutrition program. So more on the mAgri side, but on the GSMA side, mAgri and mHealth together. So I have two small questions. One is, have you ever come across the issue of actually wanting to translate content into the local languages and not having the words in the local language to actually use for translating that English language content, and how have you actually resolved that? And the second one is, when we're talking about push content, which came up a couple of times now, and especially about SMS, and we talked about inbox of SMS having like 100 messages in there. In terms of when you push out a message and SMS, how do you actually count the effectiveness of your campaign by measuring not just the number of SMSs you have pushed to the users, but how many of them have actually been read? Because I can push 100 messages, but only 1 or 2 gets read, and the other messages are, in the inbox of the user. So, yeah.
Can we answer the first one first? We may park that second one for the later session on impact, when we might look at M&E a bit more.
Yeah, I could. So a lot of medical specific content is not easily translated into many languages. So what we found in South Africa, specifically translating quite medical messages into Zulu and other languages, is that not only is there the translation really long and doesn't make sense in that local language directly translated, we often get feedback from our users, either through human-centered design processes or otherwise, that they prefer that word in English. And so there is this whole kind of testing that becomes really important in terms of they may have only heard that term in the English language, even though their first language, and the rest of your messaging is in another language.
Just quickly add to that. I mean, I think in Kenya, I think it's 44 different local languages, but I'm not the best person to create a message for someone. We do co-design, so the person affected, or the person who's in that community, I believe is the best person to do that message with support and help and facilitation. So if you do that, you can overcome that. However, when there's 44 at scale, that can become tricky, but yeah, that's one way to approach it.
I suppose we try and avoid using too much clinical terminology, because I think often you don't need it with behaviour change. You're trying to promote a social norm, you're trying to encourage men to reduce the workload of their women, and you don't need clinical language for that. Then you just try and use very accessible language.
I think Catherine.
Hi, we talked about designing content from a program perspective or an expert perspective, but I wondered about Pal's experience of using user-generated content and the value of that and the risks of that as well.
I can
Go for it.
So, yeah, we do a lot of user-generated content on some of our programs, specifically Simon's in the front row here with Girl Effect. So we run a website that's live in over 60 countries, millions of girls, and we want girls to tell their story. So we have a little feature called Your Words, where a girl can write stories normally around a specific topic. And then we edit and translate and publish that again. I think there are lots of risks associated with that, not only from a privacy and safety perspective in terms of what you're going to get in terms of that content, but also in more kind of comments and stuff around content on the site. There's also the risk of people's comments perpetuating those rumors that exist within those cultures. And so you also have to be quite calculated and systematic in how you moderate and guide those conversations that happen online that are forming that user-generated content around these topics, because they can very quickly go in a completely different direction to what your initial purpose was. So there's also a lot of process around moderation and editing user-generated content that we can share maybe in over a coffee or something like that. There's a lot.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to be very neglected in the front row.
I realised my badge was still wrong over. Yeah, thank you very much. So, as people just said, we're Girl Effect Mobile, which is a platform available through Free Basics, which is the internet.org strategy that makes a limited number of sites available, zero rated, through 75 mobile network operators across 65 countries, and we've translated content into 17 languages and developed it in 4 countries in particular. That's obviously a bit of a plug, but the thing I wanted to surface is the question of how you look to achieve distribution. Are you literally buying it through SMS purchasing through aggregators, or are you forming alliances with mobile network operators? How do you tackle that challenge of achieving reach with your messaging?
Yeah. So very quickly to respond to that, we'll probably come back to that in the next session as well.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Well, I think that from our projects that we've got at the moment is that we work with mobile phone companies in the countries that we're in, and that is also to try and arrange for them to have very low cost, free services that are going on. And we sometimes, we work with several of them, and we also work with the governments of those countries to help the sustainability of those projects, so that when we're gone and the project stops, so that they can carry on that relationship and they can carry on that distribution level, which is what we are doing at the moment in India, is handing it over to the government and trying to keep that relationship going. Yeah.
I think, can I respond to this as well? At least in terms of the mNutrition project, this was one of, I think, the tensions revealed throughout implementation, where we were creating content, but it was going into existing services and platforms that had already worked out the arrangements for distributions and knew their users and those types of things. So we came with content to be used, and it was still like working to create those partnerships to make sure that it could seamlessly go into those services and be distributed. And I did want to end off on a final thought too, that I had glossed over in my presentation by mistake, but we've talked so much today about targeting the individual, as though mobile to target the individual, it's great for privacy, for other things, but some of the reach that was originally thought of in the mNutrition project was, what if we were reaching community health workers and ag extensionists, and then through them as a dissemination point, things are going viral. Maybe it's not the individuals in terms of numbers reach, but maybe we would have had more impact reach as kind of the link between the clinical messaging and meeting people's needs. Just food for thought as we move forward together.
And final question, sorry, then we'll have a break, but do feel free to ask questions in the break. Laura.
So you guys seem like you know what you're talking about when it comes to creating content, doing the right research, doing it in the way done, thinking about your audience, segmenting your audience. The kind of language that I've heard, I don't hear much when I'm talking to people in UNICEF or the Ministry of Health, or in the public sector, people who are designing behavior change programs. And I'm wondering if that's a fair characterization. What's been your experience? Is there a real sort of public-private gulf in the way you approach behavior change in nutrition? My sense is in the public sector it's very supply-driven. If we produce it, they will pick it up and use it. But I'm maybe oversimplifying.
I'd agree, probably. I mean, the work we've done with, and I will say with people like UNICEF or the UN in general, I've been to some sort of forums with them recently, and they are changing, I think, a lot, and really sort of adopting this, embracing this sort new way of thinking. And I think that's the same actually in a lot of donors as well, Gates in particular, USAID as well. So there is a shift, I think. But my experience with Ministry of Health in East Africa mainly, it's a very new sort of way of thinking, and it's very much push, and it's very much supply driven, and let's create the solution and just ram it down people's throats, and that doesn't work. So that's my experience, I think. But I think it's really exciting to see a lot of the sort of donors and UN and people like this changing, realizing that they need something.
Yeah. Just on that, I think we've also found that gap, and it definitely is starting to close. But people generally don't realize that your marketing and distribution of that content is majority of it. You can have the greatest content in the world, no one knows about it, it's not going to have any impact. So we do focus on branding from that perspective because it kind of resonates and has that amplifier effect for the content. And as Simon mentioned, distribution partnerships are really important. You want organic traffic coming to your site, and that's really hard specifically on the web because, as I mentioned before, our users live in this media ecosystem that we don't have control of. As much as you don't want to admit it, you're competing with Facebook and spam sites and news sites, and all of those things are in the media ecosystem. If your content is not engaging and marketed as exciting, people are going to read BuzzFeed over your content. And I think that's often really missed in terms of how these programs are budgeted for.
I think too, it came to the crux of the matter in the project over government validation of the mNutrition content, where government validation for us was oftentimes a very hard process to get their buy-in to put the branding on the messaging, and they did want that clinical, top-down, I told you to breastfeed exclusively, do it 7 times a day at least. And so we tried to bring into user testing government so they could see, hey, when we read this message, the user doesn't understand. And sometimes that wasn't still enough to change. So I do think that gulf exists. I had the opportunity to be in Ghana with the users testing group. A woman read a message on expressing breast milk. She read it experiencing breast milk. So we knew she didn't understand. We have to revise it. We asked her, what would you say? She said, I would just say, squeeze it out. And the health worker was like, you absolutely cannot. It must say express. That is the correct term. And so it was, this government validation. We want buy-in for the branding. We want, to have quality evidence that everyone stands by. But then on this other hand, we have the user-consumer side. So it was, in mNutrition, a real gulf-free experience.
Did the government want to control the marketing and distribution as well as the messaging, or just the content?
No. Shaking your head.
If they were going to market it too, that would have been great.
Usually just the content.
Lucky us.
If they wanted to, yeah.
But they might argue the way you market it affects the content.
Yeah.
Just, yes, very quick.
20 seconds.
20 seconds. I think, this thinking of user-centered design in particular, but everything around it, has been done in the private sector, Unilever and people like this for a long time. This isn't witchcraft. This is a proven methodology. But on the flip side, I'll say that there are people who don't practice well, and I think it's actually the responsibility of the clients to investigate that and to actually hold people to a high standard. If you're doing a project with Unilever to roll out a new product or design a new product, if you didn't do that well, you'll hear about it and you'll never work with them again. But I think in the sort of in this space, we find sometimes that there are people that aren't practicing as well as they could, and they sort of ruin it for the rest of us as well.
Probably because impact is much easier to measure.
Well, yeah, dollars versus, exactly.
Yeah.
But again, that's probably this afternoon, but another part as well.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much to our speakers and panelists for session 1. There's really an awful lot to say on this, so do keep the conversations going over the break. We've got 15 minutes, so we're back here at, probably close to 10 now, but we're back in here at 11 for the second session. Just make your way up to tea and coffee.